Hey there, Jed Irvin here again with another video. This video isn't really part of a series, it was just something that stood on its own, and it's based on a podcast episode I did, but it's so much more easy to convey visually, I decided to make a video so that you could see it while I was talking about it. So this is about storytelling in research papers. So I'm kind of obsessed with storytelling. I think of a lot of things in terms of storytelling. If you listen to my podcast episodes, you'll hear that brought up a lot. So across my 20 years at Oregon State, I've helped on a good number of research papers. Most often I'm pulled in as a wordsmither when the deadline is getting close, because I have decent wordsmithing skills. And occasionally I'll help put some section together if I was involved in the methodology, writing the software that helped generate data for the paper or some such. But I've seen a lot of paper editing and creation over the years, and one of the things I noticed over time working with these papers is that they tend to get pretty long. You'll have a page limit, like 5 pages, but the fonts are tiny on these things. So it's a lot of words crammed into columns, and just the editing tools that people use for this, you can see a little bit of the paper at a time, but you wind up scrolling around a lot. So issues come up where you're going to add something and it can be confounding. Where should this go? What's the right section for it? Did I already say it somewhere? Stuff like that. What I'm going to talk about today is that there are different ways to tell the story of a research paper. Now, a completed research paper tells a very elaborate story. The abstract, the bit up front, tells a summary of that story. But the guts of the paper itself typically follows a standard format. Some sections are always there, some sections are optional, depending on what the topic is. But there's a general flow to things, like you don't talk about results until after you've talked about what the problem is, for example. Stuff like that. So there is an optimal structure, but while you're putting it together, that can all be very confusing. So there are different ways to tell the story of a research paper, and I'll show you them in just a minute, but the pitch is that focusing on these stories in a particular order can help organize your thoughts, can guide you on where stuff should go, can help you avoid saying something in more than one place, and guide you on what the proper order is, even down to the sentence level. So, caveats I need to mention here. So, I've never written or helped write a paper using this technique. This is a technique I came up with after helping out the most recent time. I thought back when I was making my podcast, trying to think of something helpful to say about writing research papers. And it was at that point that I had these ideas, and they all crystallized there. So this is something that none of the advisors will have ever heard of, probably, or maybe they've come up with it themselves or something similar. But consider this to be something that I offer for your consideration. Share the idea with your advisor to see what they think. So let's get to it. I'm going to go find my workflowy. So workflowy.com, it's a free tool. It's a multiply nestable to-do list web app that I use for a lot of things. And it helps me organize my thinking. So I fleshed out my ideas using Workflowy just to make sure it all made sense. And here's the final product, and we'll go through it. Workflowy is a very simple app. There's only a few things to know how to use it. One thing about it is you can use tags. I can have a tag called #7-second story. And I can click on it, and it'll open up all those things that have that tag. And so it offers a way of navigating and zeroing in on things if you have a lot of content. So first I'm going to tell you about the stories. So the first story I'm going to tell you about is the 7-second story. Now this is silly, but just to drive the point home, It is possible to tell the story of your paper in 7 seconds at the very, very, very abstract level. And so here it is. This is the most top level, uninformative, but accurate and true story of your research. And it goes like this. We did some research. We tried to improve things. We followed a process. We got results. We improved things. That's it. That is an actual story of research that you did. There's nothing useful in there, but it is the arc of a story and it shows the order. Now, there's another story that gives more detail, but it's still very generic. And the information it contains gives away so little that you'd be fine handing it to a rival researcher who's trying to write the same paper you are, or a competing one. And so I'm going to navigate in this workflow tool to show you what the rival researcher story is. So I'm going to click on rival researcher. And here we see all these bullets that say rival researcher. So I'm going to read this story. There was an old way of doing things. Something changed. We thought of a way to make an improvement, and we made things better. That's the abstract. There's a problem to address. There's the old way of doing things. We tried new approaches to better address the problem. We set up a testing space to test our approaches. Then we tested our approaches. Testing revealed interesting stuff about both approaches, and we had findings that show how we improved things. So again, there's nothing really interesting in this paper, but I'll point out that it's already got the flow it's supposed to have. It's already got the order. From a very high level, it's really easy to see what the order of these things is. If you wrote these rival researcher sentences down on a sheet of paper and scrambled them up, you could, like solving a puzzle, you could reorder them in the way that they really needed to be reordered. Now, actually, I should say, you could do this with the abstract separately, and then you can do it with the rest of the paper, because the abstract is echoing things from the paper. But if you took this bit down here, took all of the rival researcher story entries and shuffled them up, and you said, okay, put these in the right order, you could do it, because there's only one right order. You wouldn't say there's an old way of doing things before you talked about what it is you were doing. What was the problem you were trying to address? That would have to come first, etc., etc. So this is already giving you a footing in the order. Now I'm going to go back to the top level here. So this next story I call the fascinated friend story, something you would tell to a friend who is interested, but they are not expert in your domain of interest. They are a different major. They won't understand a lot of details, and they'll get bored with the details. They just want to know, what was it? What was it all about? And so all you share here is the names of things. The concepts are named, but they're not explained. So let's take a look at how this plays out. I'm going to click on Fascinated Friend here. So here's where I get to admit that the paper I wrote using this, it's a humorous piece. The topic is food fights in the COVID era. So here we go with the Fascinated Friend bullets. Food fights used to be quite satisfying. COVID restrictions changed the distance between diners, reducing the satisfaction of food fight participants. We tested 2 novel food fight techniques to address this issue: strategic combination and modified careful lob. We were able to match pre-COVID food fighting satisfaction levels using modified careful lob and more substantial improvements with strategic combination. So that is the Fascinated Friend version of the abstract. In workflow, if there's a little halo around the bullet, that means the bullet can open up, and there's sub-bullets. Some of these Fascinated Friend bullets have sub-bullets, which means more detailed stories to tell, and some don't. So here we get into that territory where some of these might be the last thing you say. let's find where we talk about prior approaches. Here we go. So I say there are two favored methods of weaponizing one's meal: frantic flinging and careful lob. I say what they are, I name them, but I don't explain them. That happens later in a different story. This is just naming things. So it helps you keep your mind on, okay, what's the level of abstraction of the story that I'm telling now? And each time I make a pass, I'm going to go deeper and deeper into the details. All right, I'm not going to read all of this out loud. I'm going to do my best to make it possible for you to actually access this workflowy document. You'd need to make a free account to do it, but I made an anybody can view link for this bit so that you can navigate around and open up the bullets and see for yourself what's going on. So I'm going to go back up to the top level here. And so we've told the story where we named things. Now we're going to go to the expert overview. This is the story that you could tell to a domain expert. They're the ones that knows what's going on, and they want explanations. They want concepts explained. Since it's an overview, they don't want to hear the details of any analysis that you did. They just want the concepts explained. So the expert overview, let's check this out. What does the expert overview bullet say? Yelling at referees was performed by a significant cross-section of society and at regular intervals in pre-COVID times. Food fights are performed by a smaller cross-section of society. Frantic flinging involves grabbing and throwing everything within reach as quickly as possible, pausing only when one has to duck due to inbound edibles. Careful lob, accomplished from a more sheltered position, etc., etc., etc. So, look at what's going on here. What happens when I read the fascinated friend and expert overview bullets together? I'll just do this one section. There are many ways we have to release our negative feelings upon strangers, yelling at referees and having food fights being prime examples. Yelling at referees was performed by a significant cross-section of society and at regular intervals in pre-COVID times. Food fights are performed by a smaller cross-section of society. So the real gold here is that's the flow. That's the order of the sentences that you want. You want to introduce the notion of yelling at referees and having food fights, and then you give a little bit more context around them. But that's it. That's the paper is coming together now, and it's in the right order. And it's easy to know what you put where, because I'm going to be putting stuff about the problem that I'm trying to address underneath here. It's like, here's the problem. There's the old way of doing things. So if I'm like, oh, I forgot to mention this one thing about the old way of doing things, where am I going to put it in the paper? I go to the rival researcher story and I say, okay, it's got to be under here. And it just narrows the focus of where you think something's got to live. The nice thing about workflowy is if you change your mind about the order, and let's say you want the methodology before the whatever, you can just drag these bullets and everything moves. So this is not a standard tool for editing a paper. Papers are written using, well, last I looked, LaTeX and tools wrapping around that, like Overleaf, that let people collaborate on the document. But one could use this to write the paper and then just copy and paste this into the other document. My sense, it would be much less confusing to build it here and do it over there. So let's see what else we got here. I'm going to go back up to this level. And now we have the final story, the convincing the reviewer story. Now to convince the reviewer, that's where you get analytical. You compare and contrast things. This is the most detailed story, and it's what you need to put in to convince a reviewer to accept the paper. So here we are for the expert overview. We talked about yelling at referees performed by a significant cross-section of society and at regular intervals in pre-COVID times. Well, convincing the reviewer story about that would start talking about other studies. A number of pre-COVID studies found that yelling at a referee on television is substantially less satisfying than yelling at them in person, where one's voice is amplified by a mob of morally compromised, like-minded fans. COVID-era studies have replicated these results, as most yelling is done at the television. So that's setting up the analysis, right? And so, again, if you read the fascinated friend, followed by the yelling at referees, followed by this, again, that's the paper. That's the flow of sentences and the level of granularity that you want to have with each sentence. Concepts being named, concepts being explained, and analysis. So I don't want this video to get too long, but that is the essence of it. So we have our 7-second story, nonsense to drive the point home. Rival researcher, tell it to anybody, doesn't matter. Fascinated friend, wants to know generally what's going on, but wouldn't understand much detail. The expert overview, they understand detail, but they don't want all the detail because it's an overview. And the convincing reviewer, which has the most detailed bits of the story in it. So there it is, a storytelling approach for writing technical papers. Hopefully you'll get some use out of this, so give it a try. If it works great, spread the word. If not, I apologize. I certainly had fun writing about food fights. What I'll do at the end here is I'll just slowly scroll through the paper in case you want to read the whole hilarious thing or not. Pause as you wish. All right, hopefully there were some laughs you got. I certainly had a good time doing it. And that is it for storytelling and technical papers. All right, take care.